Hi. All set? Yes. Hi. Hey, gorgeous. Good morning. Back at you. Miss you guys. Thank you. I miss you too.
Good morning, everyone. How are you today?
Good.
Good. You look well. Thanks for being here. I'm glad to be here too. I'm excited about our presentation this morning and our presenter. He's a fan favorite, I'll say, or at least one of my favorites. How about that? We have another great program for you today. This one is about resiliency. And I think this is such an important topic. I watch my children go through things and watch how resilient they are, and I aspire to be, once again, as resilient as they are. So hopefully we can learn something today from Dr. Dahl. Dr. Dahl is here with us today to talk about ACE, so that's adverse childhood experiences and traumatic events that, they can be negative and they can have long-lasting effects on our well-being and overall our health and wellness. And Matt is going to share with us a little bit about how to maintain balance in our lives, and in particular in some stressful periods of our life. So he is with us, but before we get into Matt and his program, I would like to have a reflection. I should have started with that, but I'm a little backwards today, but I'm resilient, and so here we go. This is called Prayer for the Workday. Heavenly Father, as we enter our workplace, we bring your presence with us. We speak your peace, your grace, your mercy, and your perfect order into our work. We acknowledge your power over all that will be done, spoken, thought, and decided within these walls. Lord, we thank you for the gifts you have blessed us with. We commit to use them responsibly in your honor. Give us a fresh supply of strength to do our job. Anoint our projects, ideas, and energy so that even our smallest accomplishment may bring you glory. When we are confused, guide us. When we are tired, energize us. When we are burned out, infuse us with the light of the Holy Spirit. May the work that we do and the way that we do it bring faith, joy, and a smile to all who we come in contact with. We thank you for everything you've done, everything you are doing, and everything you are going to do. In the name of Jesus we pray. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So another thing that you're used to, a number of papers in front of you about programs that are upcoming, information on future No One Go project or No One Goes Friday sessions, and also a chance to win later on, so you can fill that out, and Terry will walk around and collect these, and we'll have fabulous prizes for you, and also the yellow comment card. So please pay attention today, and if you have ideas on how we can improve this session, what future topics we should offer here, please make sure to write them down. We really value that, and we try to act on your feedback. So without further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Matt Dahl.
So this is a quick little video that kind of summarizes basically everything we're doing. So full disclosure, I do not own stock or get any money from Huggies. Today I wanted to tie together a bunch of different things for you. So there's a lot of content, but it is, I think, very relevant to all the work we're doing across our system. So we're going to start with self-care, because usually in presentations you end with self-care. Oh, by the way, take care of yourself. And this is the most important thing about resiliency, is recognizing that as providers of care, you can't give what you don't have. Self-care is important in lots of different ways. You have on your table a questionnaire about adverse childhood experiences. You can fill that out or not. It's totally up to you. You also have on the other side a questionnaire about resilience. And it isn't one number or one thing that defines it. It's the experience. So when you're asking people about their adverse childhood experiences, you would just simply say, have any of these things happened to you? How did that affect you? And that's really the question you want to answer for yourself. How did it affect me? Some people are very resilient, and it made me stronger. Maybe not want to do that, or have a different life for my family. Other people have accumulated stress, and it's had a significant impact on them. There's not one version of trauma that's more stressful according to other people. So you can't even compare which ones are which. Vicarious trauma, or empathic strain, another term for it, burnout, is something that happens because you do care, because you're here. And the volume, the weight of the things you hear and the things that you do can accumulate on us. So probably a more detailed talk at another time, but I wanted to include that because you have to be aware that just because these are things at 18 doesn't mean things aren't happening to us afterwards of 18. Basic good stuff. And we have a lot of these resources right here at our Magnesium facilities. And so I just want to make sure that, you know, first and foremost, you know how to diaphragmatic breathe? You breathe from your belly. In through your nose, your stomach goes out. Out through your mouth, your stomach goes down. It's relatively simple. Most people forget to do it, and they'll say, it's not working, it doesn't work. Well, I don't think you're doing it yet. Slow down and just breathe. Once you control your breath, really the rest of self-regulation falls into place. But that's really one of the most important things. Mindfulness, we'll talk a little bit more about in detail. Exercise, the kinds of things that you can do to help yourself. Safe place. Many of us are visual, and so we have a safe place in our mind, favorite place to go. That image with belly breathing actually does a lot of amazing things to us, being resilient. It could be a place you go when you're faced with adversity. It could be a place you go to calm yourself down. But it is, as much detail as you put into it, becomes linked with the belly breathing. And so the more you practice the belly breathing and your safe place imagery, the tighter that becomes, and a quicker cue it can be to reset your body. Laughter with each other, by yourself. I think there's even, from our consultants lab, one of our physicians practices laughter yoga, which is a pretty cool idea. So we have to recognize that some of our work could lead to empathic strain, and we have to work to solve that problem. And we do actually have a work group working on that. We'll talk about it at the end. So when you're thinking about what you need to do to care for yourself, first is to be aware. Because you need to reach out, because you have issues that are bothering you, it's really important that you address them, right? But stigma and other things keeps us from doing that. We need a way to discharge the feelings, and that may be different for everybody. That may be going for a run or a walk or doing other things with you. There's a technique and strategy we use in therapy called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So if there's an image or an experience that's stuck in your brain, it's a very easy and straightforward treatment that you can access throughout our system and other places as well that helps you move that image through. Our brain locks stuff in because it's supposed to help us survive, but sometimes it overshoots the mark and then it gets triggered when we don't need that information. Balance, the type of work, the roles we do, your personal and professional life. And supervision, for those of you that are supervisors, the therapeutic container is just more about that relationship. Everything we'll talk about today about resiliency is about relationship. This is really what keeps us from doing stuff, right? You know, for physicians, it's saying have to check a box, or for myself, check a box on the insurance application about ever having sought mental health services. Check that box. That can put me on the panel, right? And so how do I do that? How do I access services but then have to pretend like I don't need to? It's very difficult. so we want to avoid and confront stigma. So there's different types, but the public stigma is false beliefs in the general public. Those crazy people are the ones that always do the shooting, right? People with mental health issues are actually at greater risk to be victims of violence than commit violence. But we still think, oh, we need to have a registry for crazy people, because that'll help keep us safe. So we want to confront that. The other way you do that is if you're comfortable, share that, like for me, I share that I am not really excited to publicly speak. I do it a lot, and I kind of work myself to do it, but that public speaking anxiety, probably maybe 15, 20 years ago, it'd be like, hi guys, how you doing? I'd be all shaky. And so working through that is a good way to say, well, he did that, then maybe I can. So sharing that when you're comfortable helps people change their beliefs. Internal beliefs, if I'm weak, right? We have a hard time accessing services for our vets because the culture of the military is one of independence and self-sufficient and interdependence in your group, right? And so accessing care can be a very challenge. And then label avoidance. One of the things that we unfortunately run into here is that, if I'm diagnosing autism, I don't want my child to have that label, right? So maybe it comes with access to services, but it also comes with a prejudice that they're not going to be as capable. And as we know from all of the research we've done, there's amazing skills that people have and also happen to have autism. Does that make sense? So the glass is always half full. And when people see this kind of stuff, they think, oh, geez, really? That's just being Pollyannish, right? You're just thinking, right, not really. But choosing resilience is not self-deception. It's not inaccurate perception. It's simply a choice. So is the glass half empty? Absolutely. Is it half full? Absolutely. But what happens when you focus on the empty? How do you feel? Right? There's not much choice. It's going to go down and you're stuck at the bottom. How do you feel when you look at it half full? Plenty of room to go, over the top. So it's a choice. It's an adaptive choice that helps with resiliency. Happy people are satisfied because they develop resources like we were just talking about, and they go hand in hand. Resilient people find meaning and confidence in the most troubling of times, and that's really one of the other pieces. So we'll go over it in lots of different ways, but a lot of it has to do with our self-talk, what we say to ourselves. So if you can cue my next video, please.
Fighting me down now on such short notice, even if I wanted to go. My senor wouldn't allow it. 4 o'clock, follow the subcommittee. 4:30, stare at the abyss. 5 o'clock, solve world hunger. Tell no one. 5:30, exercise. 6:30, dinner with me. I can't so bad there. 7 o'clock, wrestle with myself. Low then. I won't. Of course, I'm also building to deny because I still think I'm time to lay in bed, stare at the ceiling, and slip slowly into madness.
One of my favorite movies that may not have struck with you, but I enjoyed it. So, relationships, positive view of yourself, the ability to manage strong feelings and impulses, and you'll see a couple of graphs coming up that we'll talk about that. And then problem solving, feeling in control. This one's important. Stress in the psychology world is defined as being held accountable for things you have no control over. Being held accountable for things you have no control over. Do you think anybody runs into that in our day-to-day work? Right? And so control becomes an important vehicle, whether that's in the work design, like we're working on, or opportunities to impact the community in different ways. That can be a really helpful, resilient thing. And then reaching out. We think that we can do things alone, and really that's not always the case. We need help. Seeing yourself, and this is all research-based, seeing yourself as resilient rather than as a victim. Coping with stress in helpful ways, avoiding the cocktails, as much as they can be a stress reducer. They're generally not a coping strategy we strongly recommend. Repeating the trauma. We can sometimes even do that in our relationships, right? We kind of pick people that we want to have to fix, like maybe somebody that we knew when we were growing up that we could have fixed, that wish we had and we hadn't. And so those relationships keep rolling over into the same spiral. Helping others, absolutely. You know, the more we reach out and help others, the better we feel about ourselves. And then meaning in your life, and meaning for the event. That's important to kind of think about. When bad things happen, we oftentimes think, if I adjust, adversity is going to hit us. How we handle it is the only thing we have control over. I can control my effort, I can't always control my outcome. And so if I focus on what I can control, my effort, that gives me the control that I'm really looking for. So there's going to be these pictures, and every time there's about like 10 of them or 11 of them in this thing. Each picture is actually the only thing I really needed to show you. The words are just for those people that are visual learners. Learn that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but will never forget how you made them feel. That's meaningful for all of us to be resilient, but also to think about the care you provide to other people. They do remember how you made them feel. So this is a quick 5-minute little overview from the ACEs. It's something that you can share. The link's available. I would encourage you to share it with your staff and have those conversations. There's other people that can come out and talk about ACEs. But it is, I think, a helpful way of framing the rest of what we're going to talk about in resilience.
What does your parents' divorce have to do with your risk for heart disease? If your mother had a drinking problem when you were growing up, are you more likely to suffer from depression as an adult? Here's what you should know about ACEs. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences, extremely stressful events that can happen to a child growing up. Some experiences are so stressful that they can alter brain development, as well as the immune system, increasing the risk of lifelong health and social problems in adulthood. The term comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, landmark research that shed new light on the root cause of everything from stroke and liver disease to substance abuse and mental illness. In the late 1990s, an epidemiologist from the Centers for Disease Control and a preventive medicine doctor at Kaiser Permanente set out to understand the association between childhood experience and lifelong health. They asked over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Health Plan in San Diego about their health history, as well as difficult questions about their experiences growing up. Up 10 different kinds of adversity in this largely middle-class and college-educated population. They were stunned to see how common ACEs were. 21% of all respondents were sexually abused as children. 19% grew up with someone who suffered mental illness. 28% had been physically abused. And 2 out of 3 respondents had experienced at least one ACE. The researchers next looked at how someone's ACE score, or the number of adversities they experienced, related to a wide array of serious health and social problems. They saw that the more ACEs someone had, the greater their risk for poor outcomes compared with someone with no ACEs. Someone with an ACE score of 4 had twice the risk of heart disease and cancer. Someone with an ACE score of 5 had an 8 times greater chance of being an alcoholic. And those with an ACE score of 6 or more, on average, died 20 years earlier. With every major problem they looked at in the ACE study, the risk went up for each additional adverse experience in childhood. As Dr. Robert Anda says, What's predictable is preventable. It's important to remember that ACEs are not destiny. ACEs are a tool for understanding the health of a population as a whole. For individuals, an ACE score can be
So, any questions about that? So that's not necessarily a fun, exciting Friday topic. It's there because we need to understand that both in ourselves and those that we are trying to help as resilients. But if you have a score of 6, don't panic. You're not losing 20 years just today. It is mitigated by relationships and resiliency. And so how that affects you is really the key question to ask. What's intriguing is the idea that this part exists for all of us as well. So these are the traditional ACE, but further research has indicated poverty, discrimination, community disruption, lack of opportunity, poor housing, violence as related to those outcomes. And so our society as a whole has impact on individual ACEs and resiliency as a community. So population health is also individual health. They're all interrelated. And I'm going to show you actually in a little bit how we're interrelated neurologically as well. So trauma and early attachment patterns determine brain development. So the research is even more specific. Children that have witnessed domestic violence have changes in their visual cortex. People that have been emotionally abused have changes in their auditory cortex. Sexual abuse, the corpus callosum, the connecting brain tissue. Those are physiological changes because cortisol, that stress hormone, is pumping through your veins when you're developing your brain. And if your brain is stuck in that panic mode of surviving trauma, it's not doing the other stuff on the top part that has to do with social connecting, self-regulation, and all those other things. Does that make sense? So, a good example, I know we have an opiate crisis. A child with an ACE score of 6 has a 4,600% increase the likelihood of later becoming an IV drug user when compared to a child with an ACE score of 0. Wow, right? So how are we not asking about ACE scores? How are we not trying to incorporate trauma and the experience into the treatment we do when we see these things? And those graphs, they're more predictive than genetics, although that's tied in here too. This is from 2014, so it has probably an update. But these are the percent of the population that has an ACE score of 4 or more. That's 15 to 20% common. For those in Wuhan, our Dodge counter, right? 10 to 15. Monroe, out where our sister hospital is, 20, greater than 20. So when you think about our population and who we're working with, that's a significant number of people that walk through, and if you provide direct care, that's 20% of the people you're going to see today would have an ACE of 4 or more. So there's some policy recommendations, and we're doing this. We're increasing public awareness. We're having these conversations across the community and with our staff. Increased assessment. We're hoping that you will take a look at using that scale, enhance the capacity to prevent. In 2012, Pediatrics came out with an article that told all family practice and pediatricians, immunizations are great, we want you to keep doing that. The number one thing we want you to do is have an 18-year-old with an ACE score of 0. Because that's going to predict their health outcome. And we want to continue to collect information and kind of get a sense of where we can improve. So this just basically says, when you're getting good stuff, bonding, learning to talk, etc., when you're stuck in the limbic system and your brain's being wired, you're going to have trouble with self-regulation, attention, anxiety, depression, and become oversensitized to stress. Sometimes we don't really think about us in a simple way. How do we get information in? Through our 5 senses, right? It's pretty straightforward. It's just the end. We do add balance and proprioceptive as other ones. Proprioceptive is your body's awareness in space, and balance. Some talk about it in gravity too, but I'm not sure how to sense that. But it is the case that it is how we get information in. only one way to get information out. It's either through our verbal or nonverbal. So when you see someone in distress, you can simplify what's going in, right? So children sometimes on the autism spectrum will cover their ears, perhaps sometimes because they hear more than we would, loud, buzzing of lights, other things, but sometimes because they don't want the unexpected noise. You know, I don't know, I can't predict what's going to happen. Environment scares me. They also sometimes have a larger amygdala, part of the brain that's responsible for stress, anxiety responses. So when you're looking at that, these are all clues for people's stress response. And you may notice them inside yourself. Again, an opportunity for resilience is being aware of that quiet space you need to go to because you're becoming overwhelmed. I need to bring myself back, right? How do I balance my stress response? And how am I aware of what I typically do? Some people don't like light touch. Some people like deep pressure. Some people have experiences in the past where their body bears the burden, which is a good book by John Sr., and talks about trauma and how it's locked into our bodies. So if you're a hands-on provider, it would be really important to look at that and understand the ACE scores, because those are the triggers, right? That's how I experience the world, is through my senses, and some of that may actually be locked in. Bessel van der Kolk has got all of the stuff you would ever want to read about the brain and how it's impacted by trauma. So courage is not the absence of fear. Being resilient doesn't mean going through life without expressing stress and pain. We do that. Resilience lies in working through the emotions and painful events and adapting to those changes. So it's not always the case that, you know, some people are born with it, that's cool, but mostly it's about the window of opportunity to develop it. And that's what we're going to talk about, is how we can develop it, but also how you recognize where it might get stuck for you. Resilience comes from supportive relationships. Many of us could probably remember one adult outside our family that feels like a person that helped us, right? That could be all of you, for any one individual that they remember. Our current president sends out those stories about authentic presence, right? And how that caring touch in those moments of crisis impacted a family, because that's relationship. How we do relationships, how we interact with each other, and how we interact with our clients and patients, that's resiliency. It's also neurological. We are creating and have something inside of us called mirror neurons. So right now, when I'm going like this, in your brain, the same part of your brain is making those connections and is active as if you were doing it too. We are socially connected, mirror neurons, interacting with each other all the time. No inside, no outside, it's all of us. So a variety of the behaviors, we've talked about some of them, and can be developed across the lifespan. This one, if you're not aware of it, I think is sort of mind-blowing to me, just amazing to think about.
What if I told you that you not only inherited your mother's eyes from your dad's chin, but you may have inherited your grandpa Barney's stress? Hey everyone, it's Natalia Reagan, guest hosting again for D News. Life isn't easy, and it appears the hardships from past generations may have a lasting effect on future generations. This idea that our current experiences, life choices, and environment could directly affect the genes of our descendants is called epigenetics. And the new research has found that the offspring of Holocaust survivors have altered stress hormones, or cortisol. Cortisol is an adrenal hormone that helps people cope with stress, aka maintain homeostasis. When an individual is stressed, cortisol helps regulate various changes in the body. These changes include fluctuations in blood sugar, immune responses, fat, protein, carbohydrates metabolism to maintain glucose, blood pressure, anti-inflammatory actions, and central nervous system activation. So let's just say cortisol is incredibly important to the body. So when researchers compared stress hormones in Holocaust survivors to those in the Jewish community who did not endure the Holocaust, researchers discovered they had lower levels of cortisol. And those individuals suffered from PTSD had even lower levels of cortisol. Researchers also discovered the Holocaust survivors were producing less of the enzyme to break down cortisol, which made sense given that this allowed liver and kidney functions to operate with lower glucose levels during times of starvation, something all too common during the Holocaust and Nazi occupation. Those who were younger during the Holocaust had the lowest levels of cortisol and produced the lowest amount of enzyme researchers looked at the cortisol levels of the children of Holocaust survivors, they found something disturbing. Like their parents, the kids had lower levels of cortisol. However, they had higher than average levels of the enzyme used to break it down. In a typical pregnancy, the placenta has higher levels of the cortisol-busting enzyme to protect the fetus. But if Holocaust survivors had lower levels of this enzyme, that would mean more cortisol would reach the fetus. So the fetus reacted by upping their enzyme protection. This made their offspring more likely to suffer from PTSD and susceptible to other illnesses brought on by unmanaged stress, such as hypertension and obesity. When researchers looked at the stress-related genes, they saw epigenetic tags were found in both Holocaust survivors and their offspring. This study is the first of its kind to discover that someone's stress and environment can directly affect their children before they were even conceived. These findings are revolutionary because it's been long accepted that DNA was the only way to transmit genetic information from generation to generation. But research shows that the environment indeed plays a role in modifying genetic information.
What do you think? How many of you knew that one? With college kids, one of the guys comes in late. Later in the conversation, he mentions that both of his parents were survivors of the Holocaust. How did that one work? Well, when they were in starvation, his mother was conceived. What did her eggs do? They learned to make sure we're going to conserve calories. He is then born from his mother, and he's conserving calories like nobody's business. Does that make sense? And so it changes us in how our genes are expressed. That's the epigenetic part. And there's like histamines and different neurochemicals and biological processes that are way above my pay grade. But it is the case that you can see that signature. Now, take that and just think a little bit about different populations, right? Think about the Middle East in general, right? Why would we have so much difficulty brokering a peace? Even effects of the hurricanes that are coming and disruption have been shown to get passed on from generation to generation. So not only do we connect with each other in terms of how we behave, but also we connect across the generations from experience. Oh yes, because that's so much better than the videos. So, the genomes are really retaining something like memory, and it makes sense, right? Because you want to adapt to the environment. And typically, we didn't live for 80 years. We used to live only 40, so the turnaround time was pretty quick. Now it's a little bit longer. This is an interesting one. The study of a small town in Sweden suggested that fluctuations in food supply had health effects over the at least 2 generations. Right? And so these are not, small findings. Obviously, a rat study. I got to have a rat study. I'm a psychologist. Stuff shows up. So our epidemic in obesity and diabetes may be a result of some of the lifestyle and experiences of our grandparents. And this is the one, remember that tree, the top and the bottom? If you have a generation of people who have suffered from poverty, bad nutrition, trauma, disruption of parent-child bonding, dislocations, how many generations will it affect them? So we have people coming into a community that may have experienced violence, whether they left from their original home or they existed in a community that was struck by poverty and violence. Genetically and resources-wise, oftentimes they're not regulating because of the changes that both had on their bodies and their brains. Does that make sense? So diet, toxin, and people all can be epigenetic and have an impact on turning genes on and off. Now, I mentioned it was about relationships. Starts with this attachment piece. And the thing I want you to remember about attachment and relationships is a key concept that's going to show up in the rest of these slides. I'm going to go kind of quick through the rest of them. It's called mentalization. Mentalization is my ability to know that I'm pretty jacked about talking about this stuff, and my wife's always like, no, not at the dinner party, don't bring up the ACE study. My kids are like, no, Dad, not the ACE study, it's just a cab ride. Right? And you may not be as into that, right? You may be like, okay, let's get this moving, right? I got other stuff to do. So knowing that there's a different perspective to take is really the key. But that doesn't come easily. I also wanted to just point out, not necessarily with all the words I can't pronounce, but you can see how it's associated with both brain development and also the immune response. Low maternal warmth in childhood is associated with adult levels of pro-inflammatory factor. So in our pediatric department, and we're giving birth to babies, we got to keep our eye on moms coming in and their attachment, how well they are connecting, and give them the skills to make sure they can bond and form that relationship. Because people can't do what they don't know how to do. And it's passed on from generation to generation. And so women with high mentalization had 10 out of 10 secure kids. They got it. Women with low mentalization only had 1 out of 17 secure attached. And then it passes on to that next generation. That child that grew up here is not likely to have that skill and also going to raise children that can't mentalize. If I can't do that, I'm not able to take that perspective, I can't self-regulate, I'm not resilient, and I'm going to be very reactive in my environment. Mentalization confers resilience. And we can teach that in lots of different ways. Certainly this is just one example within the stuff we're doing, social emotional education at the Trefford Academy all the time. It's basic skills in self-regulation, social emotional, and empathy are big 3 there. This one is interesting. I just wanted you to see what it really looks like. Babies are all dysregulated. If I'm a responsive parent, they learn to self-regulate. That make sense? You know, you're responding to them. Look what happens when they don't get responsive parenting. This is their threshold. So, all right, bad stuff happens. I can handle it. Not going to take me too much to go up over here, right? A good example would be my wife was napping in the car, and so I was coming back out, and a woman got out of her car and didn't expect to see a person in that car, and she just like freaked. Oh, you know, and was hyper aroused and then angry, right? Because you startled me. Now, was she being rude? Or was there something about her stress level that was triggered, right? And so you want to start thinking about, it's not what's wrong with people, it's what's happened to them. How does this make sense? So we can do both good things. The other thing I want to make sure you know, and this is, for me, a spiritual issue, love, that attachment, that mentalization, that responsive parenting is also genetic, right? And so as much as the stuff we don't like happening, we can become resilient, and we can raise a generation, we can support people, and we actually can increase the amount of self-regulation and healthy behavior that we have in our community by just being that change, right? By creating that connection, both in mental as well as epigenetic. Or not. But that's not going to end well. And that's sort of a big issue right now, but we're not really talking about it too much. Babies need to hear voices, they need to feel touched, they need to be connected, right? All the good stuff. And we're not attending, we're not present in that moment. This is, Tom Fabrice sent me this one. He's just brilliant, so it's kind of fun to see what he sends. But 19,000 people ages 18 to 68, you ask them, hey, in the last decade, did you change? Oh yeah, I grew, I am so much better person than I was 10 years ago. Then you ask them, hey, in the next 10 years, are you going to change? No, not good. So that's sort of true for all of us, and I put it in here so we're supposed to be, I'm supposed to be helping you with resilience, right? But if you're stuck in this, you know, I'm already good enough, I've been through a lot, I'm pretty resilient, I don't need to work on any of these skills. That was nice that he shared that, but, you know, I've got it, I'm good. You're probably like the rest of us, you know, I'm good. So we have to be aware of the fact that there are some things that we really struggle to change and to take that next step and hopefully then look at it. It's kind of funny in how they write it up in the article. They talk about how, you know, the young adult spends money to get the tattoo removed that the teenager wanted. The middle-aged adult wants to divorce the spouse they fell in love with as a young adult. The older adult wants to lose the weight that the middle adult went to all the restaurants to gain. And so it's that future state of us that we're never really kind of thinking about that we have to challenge. So there's different things about building resilience, individually, a system, and a community. And so you want to think about how we can do that. And right now we're kind of focused on our individual, but we're also going to tell you a little bit about what we're doing as a system. If you include health disorders, cancer, general bad things happening, very few of us are going to come out clean. And if you actually think about who you know and who you love, then 100% of us are impacted by some form of trauma or event. Mindfulness is one of the things that really gets us stuck in the sense that we have some negative press about mindfulness and meditation, right? It's like, that's that stuff you're supposed to do. So I just wanted to point out that actually it literally changes your brain. 6 weeks of meditation will structurally change your brain. Your amygdala will become less large and alarming. You'll be a little more chill. And your actually memory centers, your hippocampus and other areas, will also increase in volume in a good way. And so that's profound. You can change your brain. You can become more resilient by doing this, taking this class, right? And learning how to do these things. There's something called post-traumatic growth. It comes from an article. It's, doesn't mean that you have, 100% just like ACE scores. Doesn't mean 100% that, bad things happening and everybody's like, well, that's really going to help you. Matt said that, it's a growth opportunity. Don't worry about that. No. It is that you choose these courses of action when you're faced with trauma, and that's how you make a growth opportunity out of something that's really very painful. So vulnerability, which means you're kind of acknowledging that there's some bad things that are happening as opposed to the denial that we mostly live with. Self-compassion. Shame. That was my Grinch video, right? I'm going to be drilling down all the things I did wrong. I'm going to take a shower this morning and go, I can't believe I didn't do that. Oh, why did I say that? And some people do that for 10 years in the past. I'm like every 30 seconds. I'm like, oh, geez, what did I just say? What did I do? Why didn't I do that better? And so that self-compassion, that self-talk can really reinforce a lot of these negative beliefs. So pay attention. What am I saying to myself? Would I say that to somebody else? Would I say that to my partner? Would I say that to a child? Would I say that to anyone else? Well, no. So why am I saying it to myself? Resilient people are self-compassionate. That's okay. Don't want to overshoot the mark, though, on that whole ego thing and narcissism, okay? Get that down just a little bit. But in general, that's a good practice. Finding meaning, this isn't like the why we were talking about before about turning left or right. It's recognizing that if I have a why, it's easier to bear and find my how. Does that make sense? So that's another resiliency skill. Gratitude. So, how many of you every night think about 3 best things that happened to you in that day before you go to sleep? 1, 2, 3. All right. The rest of us need to know that if you do that again for just actually 2 weeks, you will again fundamentally change your brain. A relatively easy, straightforward thing. In November, you're going to get an invitation from a web link with Dr. Heather Schmidt will send out, and it's a study. It's an opportunity to kind of do this app on your phone, right? And we only had 100. We needed 300 to be like in the club. So, no shame on gratitude, but come on. We're 3,000 people. We ought to be able to sign up and do the study and get all of us thinking about the gratitude that we have for what we are able to do and all of the things that we can do here at work as well as home and in our life. Very straightforward and simple intervention for increasing resiliency. We want to learn our core skills such as goal setting, etc., and we want to recognize it's a team effort. All right? So you have these specific things you can do to become more resilient. We also happen to have classes on how to do them. So we just want to sign up and do them. So that idea is that we're not separate, right? We have this attachment. And love is epigenetic. No matter what your faith and 80% of us belong in some faith, found rudeness had an adverse consequences on the diagnostic and procedural performance of the team. So if someone's having a bad day and they're barking, that's an issue. And so we need to be thinking about how that impacts us. Information sharing, being open to communication, mediated the adverse effect of rudeness on the diagnostics. Help seeking, right? Reaching out. How do I help? What's the problem? Improve procedural performance. So open communication is the same thing we're working on in all of our kind of workouts or leadership groups or hospital initiatives. That it's just affects our brains. So this one was interesting. They had residents and med students witness this interchange between a professor and a colleague about missing a meeting. And it was either collegial, open communication, or it was rude. After witnessing that, they were 14.49 times more likely to get stuck in a diagnosis that was inaccurate. And that's important because the results were mitigated by perspective taking, right? That skill that I talked about, mentalization. They felt less hostility because if I can recognize that person's having a bad day, then I have a little distance. If I am wired this way from my A score or other experiences, then I'm over here because that's just like everybody else who's treated me badly, right? So that self-awareness of your resilience and your A score helps you recognize where you need to grow in your self-regulation as well as environments that can trip your trigger. This is important for safety. We have a lot of effort, right, in reducing medical error. The majority of medical error are mistakes in thinking. Stresses in one's environment have been found to be important contributors to those cognitive errors. And so it really does matter how we treat each other. It really does matter what kinds of things we say. How do we solve problems? Are we just complaining and undermining people? Are we just sort of like nagging at it and then throwing up our hands and say, oh, this place just stinks? Because what's that? It's not constructive, it's not resilient, it's not very helpful. If we're saying, hey, I think there's a problem and I'm going to talk directly to the person I have a problem with and work towards resolution, then we're going somewhere, right? But we have to own that and think about that as a resiliency skill, and it's good for health and it's a safety issue for our patients. We have to do that. Does that make sense? But sometimes we don't know how, because maybe we had those early experiences. We didn't know about attachment, or we didn't know about how to have confrontation, or when we did have confrontation, bad things happened to us, so we're afraid to, right? And that's part of that all-inclusive epigenetics, neurological development. It's where we have to just think, what can I do differently to make this more successful? So this is just a little journey down the neurological basis for understanding. Feeling understood. There's actual brain sections that are affected when you feel understood. Your responses are associated with feelings of social connection. But the individual differences in rejection sensitivity, where might that come from? Knowing our ACE study and some of that self-regulation, right? Am I a very sensitive person to rejection? If I am, then that's going to be a resiliency issue for me to pay attention to, because I'm not going to do very well and people won't understand me and withdraw. So I want to be someone that people understand me, and it's that mentalizing system, feeling understood, that we want to activate. So close relationships, feeling understood, increased life satisfaction, great stuff happens. When we get it wrong, when we don't understand, it degrades the relationships. People don't listen, they don't understand me, etc. This is one of the picture ones to take with you. People start to heal the moment they feel heard. So if someone's having a hard time with you, try to hold off on that response and try to understand why and how and what might they be trying to communicate. It's what happens to you, not what's wrong with you. And that's true for ourselves as well as our clients, patients. And so thinking about communication, another resiliency skill is Miller's Law. In order to understand what another person is saying, you must assume that it's true and try to imagine what it is true of. How many of us even spend the time to think that way? Right? We're going to listen to someone. we know. And one of the simplest, the most frequent medical errors is that someone comes in and the kid's walking on tippy toes and spinning around, and I'm like, yeah, that's an easy diagnosis. Or they're bouncing off the walls and, you know, they're touching my cactus. It's like, whoa, little ADHD, little impulsive there. So I already have in my brain this idea that I'm going to be getting information to confirm my bias, right? And that's what I have to challenge. It's like, no, that ADHD kid, he was, you know, traumatized. His brain was wired differently because of his experiences. That's different from a different type of diagnosis. Or with the autism, I need to include all kinds of things. Sometimes kids that are deaf look like they have autism. Sometimes they're blind and they look like they have autism. Autisms. Does that make sense? So I need to challenge my own thinking. So try not to judge ahead of time. Assume what you heard is true, and then what could it be true of? It may be true that you're trying to trick me. It may be true that you're lying to me. It may be true that, you know, you believe what you're saying, but it's not a valid thought. I don't know what it's true of. I'm not saying that you believe whatever anyone tells you. You challenge it. But it's true for science, politics, and diagnostics. We have to pay attention to what are we saying, and the heuristics, those are the shortcuts we take. That's where our prejudice comes from. When we look at people and we make a quick assessment about them based on their physical appearance, it's efficient, right, because we have that categorization, but it also is a source of bias in our predetermined beliefs. So medical students who ask significantly more questions were not affected by rudeness. Exposure to rudeness caused both residents and medical students to be locked into an error. And interventions focused on training more perspective taking and asking more questions, mitigating it. So how do we create a culture where you're able to ask questions and where you keep asking questions until you understand? So you want to understand yourself, you want to be resilient, you can do this for yourself. Recognize your temperament, your development, your stress, your medical experiences. We look for things in our patients as well as ourselves in terms of triggers. What they talk about in trauma is our hidden suitcase, the stuff we carry around with us that no one else sees, but it's sort of the thing that trips our trigger. And then if you're working with someone, slowly pace gentle probing questions until you can actually see them physically start to relax. Then you hit on it. So I'm summarizing what you said. A woman called me from California. Saw you on TV. I'm an 80-year-old person with autism. And she went on for a half hour without breaking a breath, you know, and having a glass of wine with my wife, and she's kind of like, dude, really? Talking, right? And she's really focused on the fact that, hey, I should get something, and all these people are getting things, and I'm 80, and I wasn't diagnosed, and my kids are 40, and they weren't diagnosed, and this is not fair, right? And so, summarizing what she said to me, and then just talking about what a strong person she is, what a great advocate, how she already knew about all the resources I was talking about in California, and even talked about going out to I think it was Connecticut, where they had a special program. And so it just talked about how authentic and real and passionate she was, and how she could actually change, perhaps not for herself, but for her sons, when they got to be 80, how the world perceived what was needed. Calm down. Thank you very much. She felt heard. Does that make sense? And we can do that with each other, and we can do that all the time, and it's a resiliency skill. Just a quick note on safety. Just because we think of physical safety doesn't mean it's psychological safety. A person's definition of safety may not be the same as ours. Help them feel safe, you'll need to look at the world through their kind of experience. So safety is a universal precaution. Healing happens in the context of relationships. That's our resiliency. Safety and trust must be a foundation of anything that we do with others. The patient needs to be emotionally and physically safe. And we just have to be aware not to re-traumatize people. We want to bring out that resiliency in all of us, and if we're stumbling in, and just my gender, right? If I'm walking down a hall and it's sort of an empty hall, and there's a woman in front of me, and I'm flopping along in my 11.5 shoes, making lots of noise and closing the gap, that could be an alarm, right? That could be some threat. And so just being aware of what may or may not be, and explaining, I'm going to come at you with this stethoscope, or I'm going to do this next, and just giving people that opportunity to respond. And then for yourself and your own resiliency, thinking about how those triggers may affect you and working through them. We want to be emotionally said, connect, ask permission, offer choices. For families, we really want to encourage them to be engaged, get off the electronics, to have fun, to do the things that we want to do, to bring up those good things. At a system level, we're already working on many of these things, but we want to understand the adversity and resilience in yourself, your colleagues, patients, and families that you work with. Being resilient is that choice, right? You guys are losing it. I gotta fire you back up. All right, so being resilient is about seeking out those skills, thinking about it. How do we do that? And as an organization, we want to make sure that we have those kinds of things in our policy and practice. So we have this Healthy Work System initiative, and these are the things we kind of need in work to feel good and to be resilient. Autonomy, intrinsic motivation, trust, social support, psychological safety, inclusivity. If we're not doing that, then we need to work and kind of get those things in place. We need to recognize that there's some risk factors and design the work so that it doesn't end up in empathic strain. So, always empower, including yourself. Provide unconditional positive regard. Maintain high expectations. Check assumptions. Be a relationship coach. Provide guided opportunities. So bad things happen. Outcomes can be negative. Good things happen. Good outcomes. And in the end, there's no escape. It's affecting all of us. There's no outside or inside. And so we want to eliminate the stigma, decrease the ACEs, and have you work on those resiliency skills that we talked about. So, we got yoga classes. We got a handout, right? Over there. Bunches of them. All kinds of cool stuff that we can do today. So, not saying that you're thinking you're not going to change in the next 10 years. How many of you are thinking maybe about doing something to increase your resiliency? All right. Good answer. My son, there's a stage of change thing, and there's implementing and trust. And I'll say, well, you know, what are you going to do about this thing in your life? He goes, well, Dad, I'm still in the pre-contemplative phase of change. Oh, you know, we've messed you up bad, haven't we, boy? So it is that commitment to change and that opportunity that you seek to increase your resiliency, but it also increases all of the care that we provide and all the good stuff that we're trying to do. Real quick, just to show you some of the cool things. Over at Dahl & Associates, we've been doing the ACE studies. There's a trauma-informed committee we have going with Mike, Tiffany, and Jim Mugen, Amy, Kyle, Jerry, Dr. Christensen, working on integrating our trauma-informed stuff. And then Amnesia supports CSI, which is Community Service Integration, which is also sort of an umbrella for all these other, drug-free and all these other widescreen and other communities. So we're really working hard to try to make those things work. And if you want to get involved in that, just let us know. These are a lot about relationship, aren't they? And a lot about resiliency. We already have that. So work on those, right? Get people going, compassionate listening. Develop and share the trauma-informed stuff that I sent, all those videos, and maybe not the Grinch one, that didn't go over as well as I thought. Want to create a better culture. So we have just a few minutes. Any questions or comments or thoughts before we go? What do you think about that epigenetic stuff? Does that make sense?